Trevor Hale's obsession turned a quiet town into a ticking time bomb, while Officer Ryan Keller's sharp instincts became the only barrier between an angry man and a night of deadly chaos. In the small town of Pinebrook, the night air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain, a calm that usually lulled its residents into dreamless sleep. The streets were empty except for the soft buzz of streetlights and the occasional rustle of a stray cat darting across cracked sidewalks. Officer Ryan Keller guided his unmarked car through the narrow lanes with a steady hand, eyes scanning every shadow. He had worked this route for years and knew every flickering bulb and leaning fence post. But tonight something felt slightly different, like a faint hum beneath the silence. Earlier that week, neighbors had reported small but troubling incidents: garbage cans overturned, garden sheds broken into, and tools gone without a trace. Each event seemed harmless when isolated, but Keller sensed a pattern, a quiet escalation that hinted at a mind testing boundaries. He turned onto Maple Avenue, a stretch of road lined with old oaks whose heavy branches swayed in the soft wind, their leaves whispering against one another. The glow of his headlights caught the wet pavement, making it gleam like black glass. Keller slowed, studying the dark spaces between houses, his instincts sharpened by years of chasing bigger criminals in louder cities. Pinebrook was supposed to be a slower chapter of his life, a place where people waved from porches and danger felt far away. Yet tonight, unease clung to him like the humidity pressing against the windows. Unseen beyond the reach of the headlights, a figure stood perfectly still behind one of the ancient oak trees. The shadow blended with the trunk, motionless, except for the faint rise and fall of breath. The watcher had been there for nearly an hour, patient and silent, eyes fixed on the approaching car. Keller parked near the corner where a flickering streetlight cast a pale halo on the asphalt, unaware that someone studied his every move. He stepped out to inspect a row of mailboxes, each showing signs of fresh dents, as if struck with a heavy object. The night around him was so quiet he could hear his own footsteps crunch against the gravel. Above, the moon slipped behind clouds, darkening the street until even the streetlight's glow felt thin and weak. Keller scanned the area, his senses alert, but nothing stirred. Somewhere behind the oak, the hidden figure's grip tightened on a strap slung over their shoulder, the faintest tremor of anticipation passing through their body. What began as a routine patrol was shifting into something far more dangerous, though neither man could yet see how quickly this silent game of observation would turn into a night of irreversible consequences. Trevor Hale spent most of his days alone, hidden in the back room of a narrow apartment that smelled faintly of old paint and cold coffee. Years earlier, a break-in charge had stripped him of a steady job and the friends who once trusted him. He insisted the arrest was a mistake, but Officer Ryan Keller's testimony sealed the verdict, leaving Trevor with a record that followed him everywhere. At first, his frustration was a dull ache, a background hum he tried to ignore while working short-term labor jobs. Over time, that quiet bitterness hardened into something heavier, a slow-burning anger that fed on every rejection letter and suspicious glance. He began tracing Keller's name in public records, learning the officer's routines with a focus that bordered on obsession. He discovered where Keller bought his morning coffee, the exact time he checked on certain streets, and the small habits that revealed when he might be alone. At night, Trevor sketched rough maps across the pages of a battered notebook, marking vantage points and hiding spots. He tested them one by one, crouching in the dark to measure how the moonlight fell or how far a sound carried through an alleyway. Each experiment sharpened his patience and confirmed his belief that he was smarter than the man who had humiliated him. Trevor's preparations were quiet and deliberate. He collected everyday objects: a coil of rope, a flashlight with red tape to dim the beam, gloves that smelled faintly of oil. None of it looked suspicious when scattered around his small apartment, but when packed neatly into a black backpack, it formed a toolkit of careful menace. He told himself this wasn't about revenge but about balance, a way to correct the injustice he believed Keller had forced upon him. The thought became a steady rhythm in his mind, a beat that drowned out hesitation. Outside, Pinebrook's evenings continued as they always had. Children played in backyards until porch lights flickered on, neighbors watered flowers, and the town slept without a clue that one of its own was plotting something violent. Trevor watched it all from his dusty window, the reflection of streetlights glinting in his eyes. Each night he felt the pull grow stronger, as if the quiet streets were daring him to act. He knew the moment would come soon, a night when the patterns he had studied for weeks would finally align. When that time arrived, He planned to be ready, patient, invisible, and certain that nothing could stop the plan he believed destiny itself had handed him. The night Trevor chose arrived wrapped in heavy clouds that blotted out the stars and pressed the air thick against the ground. A damp mist clung to the cracked sidewalks, softening the sound of his footsteps as he moved through narrow back streets. He wore dark clothes and carried the black backpack that had waited in the corner of his apartment for weeks. Inside were the objects he believed would give him control: the dimmed flashlight, gloves, and a small metal cylinder filled with nails and a chemical mixture he had tested in secret. His mind replayed the plan like a memorized script: approach from the north alley, wait by the abandoned Miller warehouse, strike when the unmarked patrol car slowed for the flickering security light. He imagined the moment of victory, the quiet satisfaction of seeing the man who had ruined his life finally outmatched. Officer Keller began his shift with the same quiet suspicion that had grown over recent days. The scattered acts of vandalism still nagged at him, the pattern too deliberate to ignore. Without announcing it publicly, he had asked for a second patrol car to shadow his route, a precaution born of instinct more than evidence. As he steered toward the warehouse district, the streets appeared lifeless, every window dark. He noted the familiar flicker of the security light ahead and slowed, scanning the shadows where the mist gathered like smoke. Trevor crouched behind a row of dented trash bins, heart hammering in his chest. He watched the faint glow of approaching headlights bounce across the wet pavement and felt a surge of triumph. The scene unfolded exactly as he had pictured it until an unexpected beam of white light sliced through the darkness from a different angle. Another vehicle rolled in from the opposite end of the alley, its tires crunching against loose gravel. Red and blue reflections shimmered faintly against the warehouse wall. The sound of crackling radios broke the heavy silence. Officers moved with calculated steps, their flashlights sweeping across the alley. Trevor's breath caught as he realized the trap was not his own. Panic surged, but his legs responded with instinct. He burst from his hiding place, the backpack swinging against his side, and sprinted toward the rusted fence at the far end of the alley. Behind him, shouted commands echoed and heavy boots pounded the ground. The night that was meant to crown his revenge had shifted in an instant, turning his careful plan into a frantic flight through rain-slicked shadows, where every step carried the weight of sudden failure. Trevor's shoes slapped against the slick pavement as he darted through the maze of alleys, the mist turning into a fine drizzle that blurred his vision. The backpack thudded heavily against his back, each stride sending a metallic rattle through the night. Behind him, the echo of pursuit grew louder, officers shouting positions, radios hissing with sharp commands, the unmistakable rhythm of trained footsteps closing in. He veered left, skidding on wet gravel, and vaulted a low brick wall into a narrow courtyard choked with weeds. For a fleeting second he thought he had lost them, the sudden quiet, broken only by his own ragged breathing. But the silence betrayed him. A distant beam of light swept across the courtyard, followed by the heavy clang of a gate swinging open. He leapt toward a rusted fire escape, fingers grasping cold iron as he hauled himself upward. The structure groaned beneath his weight, its bolts long corroded. Halfway up, a deafening snap cracked through the night. Metal sheared from the brick, and the entire staircase shuddered violently before collapsing. Trevor tumbled onto the wet ground with a thud that knocked the air from his lungs. Pain flared through his side as the backpack burst open, scattering its contents across the puddled concrete. Flashlights converged, their beams catching the strange assortment that spilled from the bag: gloves, rope, and the small metal cylinder he had built with such obsessive care. Officers recoiled at the sight of it, immediately radioing for the bomb squad. Even without ignition, the crude device looked menacing, a cluster of nails bound around a chemical cord that shimmered faintly under the lights. Investigators later confirmed it was capable of causing severe injury if triggered. Trevor lay stunned, every muscle trembling as the reality of capture settled over him. Rain streaked down his face, mingling with the sweat and grime of the chase. He could hear Keller's voice somewhere behind the cluster of uniforms, calm but firm, directing the scene with the authority that had fueled Trevor's rage for years. The plan he had guarded in secret, the fantasy of finally reclaiming power, dissolved in the cold rain and the harsh glare of flashlights. Pinebrook's quiet night was shattered by the wail of approaching sirens, a sound that would echo in Trevor's mind long after the cuffs locked around his wrists. What he once believed was a carefully calculated strike had become a chaotic unraveling, a moment when all the patience and anger of years collapsed into a single, irreversible defeat. The early morning sky over Pinebrook carried a dull gray light as investigators combed the scene, their reflective vests flashing against the rain-soaked alley. Trevor sat in the back of a patrol car, wrist-bound, clothes clinging damply to his skin. He stared through the fogged window, barely noticing the chaos around him. The small metal cylinder had been sealed in a heavy evidence bag, handled with the caution reserved for dangerous explosives. Technicians moved carefully, photographing each item that had spilled from the torn backpack, every glove, every coil of rope, every scrap of handwritten notes. To them it was proof of intent. To Trevor it was the end of the story he had convinced himself he controlled. At the hospital, Officer Keller underwent a routine check after the tense night. He bore no injuries but felt a lingering unease that pulsed beneath the relief. Years of police work had taught him to trust instinct, and that instinct had likely saved his life. Still, the knowledge that someone had tracked his habits and plotted an attack left a shadow that no medical clearance could erase. He walked out into the chilly dawn with a quiet gratitude, but also an understanding that Pinebrook would never feel quite as safe. News of the attempted assault spread rapidly. Local television led with flashing headlines, and national outlets soon followed, captivated by the twist of a small-town grievance escalating into something more sinister. Residents who once left doors unlocked now double-checked their locks at night. Neighborhood groups formed watch committees, stringing up new security lights and sharing tips on suspicious activity. Conversations in grocery store aisles carried an edge of disbelief that one of their own could nurture such violent intent for so long without detection. In court, prosecutors presented a meticulous case built from Trevor's notebooks, chemical purchases, and the trail of minor crimes he had used as practice runs. Mental health experts described a mind consumed by resentment, a slow spiral from wounded pride to dangerous fixation. The jury needed little time to reach a verdict. Trevor received a lengthy sentence that would keep him behind bars for decades, a future measured in years of silent cells rather than revenge-filled nights. For Pinebrook, the incident became a cautionary tale retold at town meetings and in classrooms. Parents reminded children that anger left to fester can twist into something unrecognizable. Keller returned to duty, quieter and more watchful, carrying the memory of how close the darkness had crept. What began as scattered acts of mischief had nearly become tragedy, proving that the thin line between obsession and violence can be crossed without a sound until it is far too late.